Time once again for Second Helping, the podcast of choice for fans and followers of the number one league in all of collegiate athletics, the Southeastern Conference. Travis Reier, senior analyst for BamaOnLine.com, part of the On3 network, alongside my great friend and co-host, Brent Beaird, college football analyst for First Coast News down in Jacksonville, Florida. Brent, of course, also a voter in the race for the most prestigious individual honor in collegiate athletics, the Heisman Trophy. Man, Brent, we've got the regular season behind us now. We're going to go back and review the games from Rivalry weekend. We're going to talk some bowl projections for a lot of those teams. We got the transfer portal opening up on Monday. We got coaching changes. And oh, by the way, we're still going to play a football game in Atlanta of some significance on Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, it really is amazing as to what's going on here. And let me say real quick that being a Heisman voter, we basically were given a ballot on Monday of this week. And the deadline is Monday of next week at 5 o'clock. Have to have 3 players. Now, I'll be curious if it's more than that, but I kind of doubt it. And obviously, everybody knows who the big 3 are at this point. I never vote until championship Saturday is over because you never really know what goes on. Because let's just say, for instance, if Bo Nix or Michael Penix has a great game, that may make people, if they can, I don't think they can, forget what Jayden Daniels has done at LSU among that. So, the process of voting has gotten a little more complicated. So, which means, Trav, I'll probably need to call my 9-year-old granddaughter and have her walk me through it with that too, but with her technical knowledge. But just want to give our listeners just a real brief timeline of what we're expected to do as Heisman voters over the next few days.
Yeah, great opportunity on a huge stage for both Nix and Penix on Friday night in Las Vegas, and that Pac-12 championship game, the go-away game for the Pac-12 coming up with the Huskies and the Ducks of Oregon. And Jayden Daniels made his final case against Texas A&M last Saturday in Baton Rouge. We'll get into that as we run through Week 13 games in the Southeastern Conference. So we got to start, Brent, with that Egg Bowl. The Ole Miss Rebels sluggish throughout that contest, but gets the job done 17-7. A defensive battle, just what Lane Kiffin dialed up, right? But give Pete Golding and his guys on that side a lot of credit. Did a nice job against really just a Mississippi State offense. Anemic, the best way to describe that unit. And also not a surprise, in the short time since the Egg Bowl, we understand an offensive guy is coming in to take over the reins for the Bulldogs moving forward.
Yeah, that's an interesting hire in Jeff Lebby, the Oklahoma offensive coordinator. He as a matter of fact, ironically enough, was with Lane Kiffin not too long ago. Lebby is Art Brow's son-in-law, but I think they have moved past the Baylor situation. I'm sure that was brought up a little bit, but he's a good play caller. He's been wildly receptive from the Mississippi State fan base. Trav, have you ever seen a situation where and help me on this, did you see the clip of I believe it was the Mississippi State athletic director,
Selman,
riding on the shoulders of Mississippi State fans when they bring him in? I thought that was something we haven't seen in a while, but I'll be honest with you, my heart goes out here, Trav, to Will Rogers, who I really have thought so much of, one of the better quarterbacks in terms of numbers for the SEC in history. So I'm hoping he will land on his feet. I think he will. But again, with Ole Miss, 10 wins for Lane in 2 out of the last 3 years. They made some considerable progress. Jackson Dart is coming back. So I think the question, Trav, for me is with them is they have certainly been able to reach that 10-win plateau. How high is the ceiling for Lane Kiffin with this Ole Miss team?
Well, with Texas and Oklahoma coming in, I'm going to say 10 wins is the ceiling for Ole Miss. And
right.
I think if you're Ole Miss, you would, in that scenario, take 10 wins any season you can get them moving forward. Interesting game last Thursday night. Jackson Dart throws for just 96 yards, but Quinshon Judkins runs for 119. Brent, it looks like Orlando, the most likely destination for Ole Miss from a bowl perspective. Citrus on the horizon for the Rebels, perhaps.
Oh, I think they would probably enjoy that. I'm sure they would enjoy the weather and all that goes along with it. But look, that still says a lot for what they have been able to do. And listen, you mentioned Junkins. Trev, I don't know if he's got the credit that he deserves. 1,000-yard rushing in back-to-back seasons. And look, you and I both know in this league how hard that is. And again, and you called this several months ago, Lane is not given the credit, I don't think, for his ability to come up with a rushing attack that is lethal in this league, known as for throwing the ball around. I get that. But really, the staple of this offense is a running game, isn't it?
Yeah, you said it with Quinshon Judkins, and that's after a slow start to the season. So Ulysses Bentley, the third, also a nice option throughout the season for Ole Miss in that backfield. But Mississippi State at 5-7, 1-7 in the SEC, falls short of bowl eligibility. The Jeff Lebby era in Starkville begins in earnest. Time to hit the portal, time to hit the trail for Jeff Lebby coming up here in the next few days. On Friday of last week, we had Missouri and Arkansas in Fayetteville. No surprise there, as Missouri absolutely takes apart the Razorbacks, building that big lead through three quarters, 41-0, I guess, at one point. And the Tigers cap a 10-win regular season with what Cody Schrader does, right? He rushes for 150 plus, 200 plus for the outstanding Missouri running back.
And that Missouri offense really was just tremendous this year. Brady Cook, Luther Burden, what a great job to get to 10 wins. Easily the best season for Missouri since winning back-to-back. And people forgot this at the draft. They won the Eastern Division in 13 and 14. So, I think they've done a lot of this with their defense, and I'm not sure that's got enough credit and they lost a lot of guys, Isaiah McGraw, Trajan Jeffcoat, Arden Walker, and they were able to replace these guys with Darius Robinson and Kevin Peoples. Tyrone Hopper at linebacker really had a good year. Chris Abrams Drain at cornerback did too. So Missouri really just took Arkansas apart. But before we get into the Hogs, just some credit for Eli Drinkwitz, Travis, and what he did with this team. The offense got a lot of the publicity, but that defense was stout throughout the year.
Yeah, and in an era of $20+ million buyouts, a athletic department rewarded for committing to a head coach who really wasn't coming off a season of significance. As we talked about many times, Missouri not only committed to staying with Eli Drinkwitz, but also extended him, gave him a raise. And Missouri, it looks like, headed to a New Year's Six game, most likely, according to a lot of the projections, Brent, Missouri, Penn State in the Peach Bowl, perhaps on December the 30th. So big season for Missouri. Arkansas looks to regroup. And how about the news of the last 24 hours involving the Arkansas coaching staff? Easy Rider going to chop her back in to Northwest Arkansas.
Yes.
Brent, as the offensive coordinator for Sam Pittman. Bobby Petrino back in Fayetteville?
Number one, with Petrino, the A&M beat writers really give him a lot of credit in spite of all the dysfunctionality with Jimbo Fisher, that he frankly did a good job with that A&M offense in a lot of ways. Now he goes to Arkansas. Now, what people may have forgotten about Petrino is Petrino actually, and I think, Travis, this is like the Little Rock Touchdown Club or something of that effect, that he actually came back. Now, this was months ago, and sat down and basically gave a heartfelt apology for his behavior when he was in Arkansas. But the reality of it is he has been well received, and Trav, with that Arkansas offense that really struggled a lot last year, I think they're very excited about this, and at least for the moment, it's a shot in the arm for Sam Pittman, who is staying. Some Arkansas fans not real happy about that, but they certainly are happy that Petrino is back in the fold.
Yeah, as much as anything, Petrino in the way of quarterback play and coaching that position and how things play out for Arkansas behind center moving forward. KJ can come back, can he?
Yes.
Quarterback?
Yes.
So some things to play out there with that spot and how that proceeds now with Bobby Petrino back at Arkansas. Speaking of Bobby Petrino and some previous stops, Brent, let's get into Saturday's early games from over the weekend. Louisville, a top 10 team built in large part on the strength of Bobby Petrino and his stint there, goes into that matchup with Kentucky. And I talked about this since the preseason, how important this game would be for Mark Stoops. And Mark Stoops, a big part of some storylines over the weekend, too. Really. Just a crazy weekend. But Stoops gets it done. This was a Kentucky team that was really spiraling over the second half of the season. So to go into Louisville, get its fifth straight win in this series, and get it done on the road, very impressive to say the least. Devin Leary with some good things, Ray Davis with some good things, and Kentucky wins by 7 to keep that streak alive in the series with the Cardinals.
Well, and Stoops, with a chance to go to Texas A&M, he certainly read the tea leaves, and the reaction of the A&M fans, who frankly did not want him.
That felt like a test balloon that went up late Saturday night to kind of measure the temperature of that fan base, and I think they got a definitive response on that one.
Yeah, they really did. But I will say this. I think you and I both believe Mark Stoops is a solid football coach.
Yes.
I mean, is he one of the elite coaches in the nation? Well, I mean, that's certainly arguable and debatable. And a lot of people probably say no. But for what he's done at Kentucky, I still think they will put a statue of him at some point. If he stays there a little bit longer. Unfortunately, Ray Davis looks like he's heading off to the NFL. Devin Leary was not the guy they thought he was at this point, but they did have some positive things. Deion Walker, the defensive lineman, had a really nice year. They had a nice surprise from Maxwell Hairston at defensive back. Obviously, Ray Davis overshadowed that offense and kind of carried them along during that time. But look, I'm with you on this Louisville game. And people sometimes really don't understand how big of a rivalry that is. Look, it's a bigger rivalry in football as it is in basketball. So Stoops is staying, and people forget Stoops is still making what, Trav? $9 million a year. So it's not like he's going to be in rough shape by going back to Kentucky. Now they've got a ways to go, and they've got some improvement to doing, particularly for next year. But listen, if they could, after beating Louisville, Trev, if they win a bowl game, I think Wildcat fans will have a pretty good taste in their mouth in the offseason.
They will. And you talk about a bowl game and the possibility. Seems like Kentucky's in that realm of Music City,
Yes.
maybe Texas Bowl, maybe Duke's Mayo Bowl. Any of that would taste pretty good. Speaking of mayonnaise, to the Kentucky fan base, no doubt about it. Also, in that early window from last Saturday, you talk about Jayden Daniels. He goes out with another 200 plus, 100 plus performance in LSU's 42-30 win over Texas A&M. Throws for 235, runs for 120. Malik Neighbors. Boy, if there's a possibility that a finalist for the Biletnikoff Award might be under the radar,
yes,
it's Malik Neighbors, I got to think. And another impressive performance for him. You know, A&M, give him a lot of credit. We talked about Jalen Henderson last week, who has kind of stepped in there at the quarterback position. He throws for nearly 300, but the Tigers still able to get the job done. Both these teams headed to bowl games for the postseason. One of them will be doing it in an interim situation, but we do find out post-game and in the days since, Mike Elko on his way back, Brent, to Aggie Land to take over as the head coach.
Well, I think that's a good hire, frankly. I mean, look, Elko's kind of reserved, and there's nothing wrong with that. He gets his results done on the field, and anybody who can go back to Duke or go to Duke and make the inroads that he did, I was very impressed with that in what he did. He did a good job as the coordinator at A&M and pretty much everywhere else he's gone during this time. So, yes, that's going to be a good hire. I understand Elko's already sat down with Connor Weigman, and they're kind of on the same page, and that's extremely important with that too. But you're right about Jayden Daniels and where this is going. Just an incredible season in so many ways. And Trav, how about Brian Thomas also in that receiving core that has been so impressive? But listen, LSU has been, to me, a very confusing pattern over the last couple of years, making a lot of headlines, offensively doing extremely well, struggles with defense on what to do with Harold Perkins. And you called this last year, and it's the same thing this year. As good a coach as Brian Kelly is, you've still got a team with multiple losses, particularly to Ole Miss, at the worst possible times, which really makes you kind of wonder, where is that LSU signaling going into the next few years?
You know, I'll say this about the 7 losses that Kelly already has in 2 seasons. I think all of them came to good football teams too, though,
They
right?
did.
When you think about 2 of those were Florida State of the 7. Ole Miss is a top 10-ish team.
It is.
You know, Alabama, obviously. Tennessee last year was a very good football team. So there hasn't been sort of that glaring loss, but they're losses nonetheless. And there's only so many of those that a win over Alabama last year can cover for. I mean, losing to Georgia in the SEC championship game last season was certainly no disservice to the program. But LSU, it looks like, headed to Tampa to play in what used to be, or always will be to me. It'll always be the Outback Bowl to me. Now it's the Relia Quest. So LSU headed to the bowl game. Texas A&M, again, in that interim situation with Elko coming on board. Looks like maybe the Texas Bowl could be Music City, kind of like Kentucky as far as that realm of bowl potential and opportunities for the Texas A&M Aggies. And you know who I finally got? I've thought of Mike Elko, and who is this guy? Who is his comp? Because it's hit me at, you know, George O'Leary to me is the Mike Elko comp.
Yeah.
George O'Leary, a former defensive coordinator. George O'Leary did some great things at a place like Georgia Tech in the ACC. Elko goes to the ACC, does a good job, Looked like George O'Leary maybe taking another step up from there to Notre Dame until we had resume gate, I guess.
Yeah.
And now Elko looks to take the big step up to Texas A&M. How about that 3:30 window last Saturday? Well, specifically anyway, certainly not so much Vanderbilt and Tennessee, but definitely the Iron Bowl, the game that keeps on giving. Every couple of years anyway, when the game is played at Jordan-Hare Stadium, all bets are off, and the Crimson Tide learned that once again. Although in each of these last two trips, it's been the visitor. It's been Alabama that has inflicted some potentially long range trauma to the Auburn Tigers. Did it once again on a play, 4th and goal from the 31-yard line of Auburn in the final minute, down 4, and Jalen Milroe connects with Isaiah Bond in the back left corner of the end zone. Just when you think you've seen it all in the Iron Bowls, Brent, and I know you've seen more than just about anybody I know for sure. This one presents itself.
Just an incredibly iconic play. As some folks have said, that may have the 4th and 31 may Beaird kick 6, and I think there's probably some truth to that. But what a game that was. I mean, Auburn deserves a lot of credit. Hugh Freeze was able to confuse the Alabama defense. I think they were able to figure some things out as the game went on, but I give Freeze credit for that. There was a lot of, obviously, smoke and mirrors. There were also a lot of atrocious officiating on both sides also. But this is going to be a fascinating offseason for Auburn in the draft. They really need to find a quarterback, and pretty much every transfer quarterback I've seen so far, Auburn has been listed as a possibility. I do give Peyton Thorne some credit. I think he did about as well as he could do, and that doesn't mean that he couldn't be in the list for that. But Auburn ran the ball well. Jarquez Hunter, 83 yards. Austin, 85 yards. But Hunter is a guy that, and you call this at the beginning of the season, was that when Hunter came back and he rounded into form, that they would be a different animal offensively, and I think that happened. So, Trav, it really does make you wonder when Hugh gets a passing attack to complement the rushing attack, what they're going to be.
Yeah, and they got some production from Javarius Johnson on the outside in that game against Alabama. He had 76 receiving yards, and he had the end around for a touchdown.
Yeah.
That gave Auburn the lead briefly there before Milroe went deep to Jermaine Burton. That was a wild, too. The end of each half was about as crazy as it gets. There was 3.5 minutes left in the second quarter, and it was a 10-7 game. By the time those teams went to the locker room 3.5 minutes later, it was 17-14. And, of course, we all know what happened in the final moments of the second half. So Alabama survives, once again, a trip to Jordan-Hare Stadium. It is off to the SEC championship game coming up on Saturday, taking on those Georgia Bulldogs. We'll get more into that matchup. But for Auburn, you said it. I thought Peyton Thorne really kind of found himself in that offense as the season wore on, kind of like Jalen Milroe, not to the extent of Jalen Milroe, but as far as his presence in that offense for Auburn, that certainly proved beneficial. He hurt Alabama with his legs in the second half. Alabama did a better job on the backs in the run game after halftime, but really never had a true answer for Peyton Thorne there running the football in the third and fourth quarters. Looks like Auburn, kind of like what we talked about with Texas A&M, Brent, and I guess also Kentucky there at 6-6 and bowl eligible, Music City, Duke's, Mayo, perhaps the Liberty Bowl. But it looks like the Birmingham Bowl at least is off the table for the Auburn Tigers this time around. Also in that 3:30 window last Saturday, Tennessee caps an 8-win regular season with a 48-24 win over the Vanderbilt Commodores. Pretty good start for Vandy in the game, but that was about it. And Vandy finishes as the lone winless team in the Southeastern Conference for the 2023 season, 0-8, and all of that momentum we thought Clark Lee had going into the season. Now there are questions about whether he'll be in that job beyond next season.
Yeah.
Josh Heupel, on the other hand, a solid season for Tennessee, but I think this one fell beneath expectations for that fan base too, especially with the way we saw that Tennessee program take a big step a year ago. But it does count as another rivalry win for Tennessee with this victory over Vandy and also one over Kentucky.
Yeah, there were multiple fights in that game, and I'm, which I'm sure drew the ire of the SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey. We may not hear about it, but I'm sure he wasn't happy about that. Boy, oh boy, and you saw Vanderbilt early on against Hawaii. And by the way, I want to give Hawaii props. I want to give you a minute to do that later on. What a season that they had too. But geez, Ken Seals is transferring out. I believe A.J. Swan is too, so they're going to be really depleted at quarterback. Ethan Barr, their linebacker, who is a two-time captain, is going to be transferring. So there's a lot to rebuild, obviously, at Vanderbilt. And look, I think both of us never really were on the Joe Milton train. Milton did okay, frankly, but it wasn't anything, certainly wasn't Hendon Hooker worthy, to say the least. But this Tennessee team, and I give Heupel credit, he could have stuck with and trying to have the passing game he did last year. He didn't have the players to do it. He didn't have the quarterback to do it. So they developed a really good running game. Their defense was much better. I know Vol fans aren't particularly elated with 8-4-ish type year, but still at the same time, Heupel continues to make some headway. And Tennessee would be very interesting to see what they do during the off season. They had some guys like Elijah Herring, the linebacker, who really stepped up and played well. Just got beat badly by Missouri. We credit Missouri for that. So, Trav, kind of a mixed bag for the Vols, wouldn't it?
It was, and I would say the Nico Iamaleava era is underway in Knoxville. Yes. And it makes you wonder, it looks like Tennessee headed to perhaps the Gator Bowl in Jacksonville, where it could be a really fun matchup if it is Tennessee, North Carolina. And you talk about Drake May and Carolina on that other side. Although I would think maybe May's presence in that game, given his NFL draft status, would be in question if it played out that way. But do you play Nico? Do you script in Nico in the bowl game? I would think you would. Why wouldn't you? I mean, you want to be respectful to Joe Milton, and he did have a huge game last Saturday. He counted for 6 touchdowns for the Vols, but I would think this is an opportunity to go ahead and get Nico repped up a little bit before you even get to spring practice and script in at least a couple series for him there in the first half and see where it goes. But the Vols, sure, 8 wins. That's a good sign for that program, though, I think. When you're back to 8 wins being a bit of a downer for Tennessee, that's where you expect that program's mindset and that fan base's mindset to be on the heels of an 8-4 campaign. Last Saturday night in Gainesville, Florida State with everything on the line at 11-0 going in without starting quarterback Jordan Travis. Similar situation for Florida just in terms of bowl eligibility at 5-6, trying to avoid an 0 for November was Billy Napier and his team. Also without its starting quarterback, Florida was. Max Brown in there, Tate Rodemaker for Florida State. The backup bowl at the Swamp last Saturday night. A really competitive game, but ultimately Florida State, on the strength of 10 fourth quarter points, able to eventually wear down the Gators and push through to a 12-0 regular season and a shot at the 4th spot in all likelihood in the college football playoff.
And the really disappointing thing about Florida in those last 3 games, they could have won all 3 of them, frankly. It would have ended up 8-4, 7-5, but that did not happen. So there is a lot to think about as far as the Gators are concerned. Corey Raymond, the secondary coach, who is an outstanding recruiter, certainly has that reputation when he was at LSU, and defensive line coach Sean Spencer are both gone. So there will be certainly some house cleaning during that time too. Jonathan Odom, one of the tight ends, is heading out, and I think everybody has a magnifying glass and a microscope to see what Napier has learned in this off season, what he's going to do with the staff at this point too. It would have really helped them to be in a bowl game, but it just didn't work. I still think they've got some good things to help them. I think ETN at running back is tremendous.
He went out of that game with an injury, didn't he? Against Florida State?
Yes, he did. And that's a good point. That really hurt them in the second half. Even though Montreal Johnson had a good game overall, it was difficult. But again, Trav, Austin Armstrong, who was at Southern Miss and then Alabama for a cup of coffee, the defense started well. Multiple injuries as the season went on. Things just did not gel for that defense. So it was a very difficult year for the Gators in a much anticipated off season of change to see what's going to happen.
Yeah, you talk about portal teams coming up for next week. Florida, I think certainly qualifies as an active participant, really both ways, because you talked about already some of the departures that we know about that are coming for the Gators. But you do have a quarterback in Graham Mertz that you expect to be able to build around. And again, I'm interested to see the extent of that injury to Etienne too. For Florida State, a chance again to qualify for the college football playoffs. It'll be interesting against Louisville because Louisville dropped that game to Kentucky last Saturday at home. Interesting. A couple of these championship games, I really like it.
Yes.
Alabama, Georgia in a rematch, and Florida State, Louisville in a rematch from the regular season. So there'll be some newness involved there. But yeah, for Florida, big stretch coming up for Billy Napier is he needs to get this thing as close to right as he possibly can going into year 3, and especially with that schedule. Boy, the schedule of the SEC teams in general next year with the expansion and some of the non-conference scheduling is rough. Georgia gets the job done in Atlanta last Saturday night, Brent. Overcame a little bit of a deficit there. Georgia Tech got out to the early lead, in part due to a takeaway from the Georgia Tech defense, but ultimately, Georgia playing shorthanded on offense without Brock Bowers, without Ladd McConkey, does enough to win 31-10 and really had that game in control going into the fourth quarter. It was a 31-13 game. Tech scored 10 points in the fourth quarter to apply some makeup to that final score. But I give Tech credit, though. I mean, they were right there. Tie game at the half, or actually a 4-point Georgia, or actually 11-point Georgia lead there at the half. But the Dawgs do what they need to do and now set up to perhaps win a 30th straight game, and they'll need to do it against the Alabama Crimson Tide in the SEC championship contest.
Well, and first of all, Brent Key deserves a lot of credit for what he's done at Tech. I mean, obviously they got the mystifying win over Miami, more for Miami's doing, but Tech took advantage of what Miami did with that one. So really good job by Brent Key in building that team with that recruiting base around Atlanta. You really wonder what they could do. But no doubt, Georgia's had a lot of injuries. Jamin Dumas-Johnson is week to week. He broke a bone, but in his forearm. Julian Humphrey, the cornerback, shoulder injury, so they're waiting to see what's going to go on there. But typically with Georgia, I mean, you get Jamon Dumas-Johnson out, Trav, and C.J. Allen, a freshman, comes in and has had 33 tackles. in the last 3 games, which is amazing. Fran Brown is leaving to go to Syracuse. I think that went under the radar with a lot of people, but he's well thought of within that program from the players and the coaches. That's just a blip on the radar. That's not going to affect Georgia at all. Darius Smith is a sophomore linebacker. He's transferring out, which is no surprise. That was just one of those things that did not work out. But Ladd McConkey, Ra Thomas, Tate Ratledge, all those guys will play. I don't have any doubt about that whatsoever. But this team has been resilient. They've got criticized for their schedule, but they have bulldozed through that schedule as they can. And Carson Beck from Jacksonville has looked very good. Seems to get better all the time. And I'll tell you what's gotten better, Travis, is that running game. Kendall Milton is finally healthy. He is running well. Dejon Edwards, the same. I mean, my goodness, just pick a position group or a player, and it's just really an embarrassment of riches that have all come together as Georgia stands on the verge of history right now.
Yeah, Kendall Milton, 156 against Tech last Saturday night. And, this isn't a Georgia backfield from the running back perspective that has that sort of slam dunk NFL guy that you typically see. But Dejon Edwards, he had the fumble early, I guess, in the game last Saturday night. That aside, he and Milton have been a very capable duo. Beck, consistent, solid. I will say this, kind of like the Alabama defense against Auburn. We saw Georgia Tech run for 200 plus in that game Saturday night. And some of that has to do with the presence of a playmaker at the quarterback position that can do things with his legs, like Haynes King can for Georgia Tech. So that's going to play into some of the storylines for Saturday in Atlanta when Georgia and Alabama get together. We'll talk a little bit more about that coming up. South Carolina looking for that bowl eligibility, 6th win in that rivalry matchup with the Clemson Tigers. Brent, you told us that Clemson defense, specifically that Clemson defensive front, might be a little bit too much for a South Carolina offensive line that doesn't really resemble a ironclad wall in a lot of ways. And it played out that way. Spencer Rattler only able to throw for 112 yards, 35 rushing yards from Anderson of South Carolina. Xavier Legette, 68 receiving yards. And it's not like Clemson went off offensively either, but the Tigers get enough to pull out a 16-7 win in Cola.
Travis, what I don't know how many teams compare to South Carolina as far as being really a disappointment in a lot of ways. This is just not a good football team right now, frankly. And you mentioned this earlier in the month, to waste Spencer Rattler, frankly, is just a shame. But they are not anywhere near where they need to be on the line of scrimmage. They don't have the weapons on the outside. They're going to get some guys who are moving on. Donovan Westmoreland's one of their edge guys. He is in the portal already. I don't know if anybody else was necessarily as disappointing, maybe Mississippi State, as Carolina was. And I'm not saying that Beamer is going back to the drawing board and starting over here, Trav, but boy, if you're a South Carolina fan, this season leaves yourself scratching your head as far as what the future is going to be in Columbia.
Yeah, it's kind of been a reversal in some ways of what we expected going into the season. We anticipated South Carolina, Vanderbilt, perhaps Florida, even taking that next step. And that really didn't happen for any of those three teams, but it did for Missouri, who you wondered a little bit about going into this season. So things haven't gone according to script. You could even say that about Tennessee in terms of an 8-win season after the performance from a year ago. So, Yeah, I think it just shows, it underscores, even with the big numbers on the buyouts, how quickly coaches can go from certainties to major, major question
Yeah.
marks in a very short period of time. So there you go. That's a review of last week's games. Rivalry week 2023 in the books. And that leaves us with Saturday's matchup. One more time, Alabama and Georgia in Atlanta. We've seen this one a few times before, Brent, and we kind of already previewed the matchup in some ways in talking about the games from last week. So with that, I'm going to ask you one or two key points, one or two key aspects of this matchup that you're especially interested in.
Well, Georgia has had a pattern the whole year of starting slowly, and multiple teams have gone ahead of them, even by 2 touchdowns. And now they've been able to correct that by at least third quarter, if not the end of the second quarter, to where they've gone ahead. Now, they can't afford to do that with Alabama. I mean, Bama's got enough firepower to where they could really take advantage of that overall. I still look, as good as this team is, I still think Georgia can be vulnerable at times. I don't think their defense in that front seven is as good as it was last year, frankly. But they are resilient. They know how to win. They certainly have understood that. Both these teams are built to beat each other. Both these teams have one of the best rosters in America, and they are both very capable, I think, of being able to win this game. I know there's some edge toward Georgia with it, and I'm just kind of wondering, Travis, with both these quarterbacks, we'll camp here a minute. As good as they have done, how will they react on the biggest stage, virtually of all? I mean, this is not the national championship game, but man, oh man, it almost feels like it's very close to it, doesn't it? And again, to me, the keys are going to be which quarterback is the most consistent. And look, there's no way, Trav, you can talk about a game like this without looking at what both these teams have built on the line of scrimmage. And frankly, I think the credit that Kevin Steele gets for developing this Alabama defense and improving it from what it was last year.
No doubt there was a step back of sorts last week. I think Alabama fans were wondering where that
Yes,
front seven went because
right.
Alabama had been really good, especially against running backs in the run game, whether it was Quinshon Judkins of Ole Miss earlier in the season, whether it was Woody Marks at times of Mississippi State, Ray Davis of Kentucky, Jalen Wright of Tennessee. Alabama was effective against most of those guys. But that wasn't the case last Saturday. You had a couple of backs for Auburn. It wasn't just Hunter. It was also Austin, who had some big plays against this Alabama defense in the run. I expect that'll get cleaned up this week
Yes.
against Georgia. I don't think run fits will be as much of a problem. That doesn't mean Georgia still isn't physical enough and talented enough up front to still create creases for Edwards and Milton in that run game. I think a couple of X factors for these teams, and not just the obvious ones. I think for Alabama, it's Jalen Milroe with his ability to run the football at the quarterback position. For Georgia, it's assuming that Brock Bowers goes. He's the kind of guy you don't really have a matchup for in most instances. But then there are some that are under the radar. I think guys like Dylan Bell for
Yeah,
Georgia
sure.
and Kendrick Law for Alabama. They're both wide receivers by trade, but you'll watch how Georgia uses Bell. You'll watch how Alabama uses Law, similar in some ways. And I think they could prove big in this matchup. And also, simple enough, right? Red zone, third down. Both these teams, as you would expect, given the quality of caliber of athlete and players that they have, do well offensively and defensively. Now this is one of those games where the team that kicks the most red zone field goals could very
Yes.
well lose. So
Yeah.
red zone conversions for touchdowns, staying on the field in third down, that's where Bowers is big. That's where McConkey is big. They're both questionable. That's where also Jalen Milroe is very big with his legs. So those are the kind of things I'm looking for on Saturday.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. And obviously the kicking game is going to be huge.
Two good
Uh,
kickers. Yeah, both these
and
kickers are really good. But if you're the defenses, you want to see a lot of those guys,
yes.
especially where the red zone is concerned. You don't want to see a lot of them on extra points, obviously. But heck yeah, if one of these guys kicks 4 or 5 field goals, could be a pretty good situation for the other team.
And look, I think another situation here is all hands will be on deck. I mean,
Yep.
everybody's going to play in this game. I have no doubt about that. And something you said a minute ago in cleaning it up. Look, I think both these teams will be at their best. I have no doubt about that whatsoever. Both these teams are they are built for big games like this. They are built for the expectations and the pressure that comes from a game like this. Also, but Trav, the amazing thing about this is, and we won't elaborate on this because everybody else has throughout the week, is that under some different circumstances, Georgia could have lost this game and still gotten to the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
There's certainly doubt about that right now. Alabama could win this game and not make the playoffs. So
and both could end up out of the playoff.
Yeah.
Which to me, if that is the case, if Alabama wins the game, Alabama doesn't make it, Georgia doesn't make it, do you really have a playoff? I mean, if you don't have SEC representation with teams of this caliber, look, I know the TV show on Tuesday night tries to tell you Alabama's the 8th best team in the country right now. If you watched Ohio State and Michigan last Saturday, for example, do you really believe that right now? And I understand Alabama struggled at Auburn. But, Alabama struggled at Auburn 2 years ago, too, and then went on to beat Georgia by 20 the next week in the SEC championship game. I'm not saying in any way that's my expectation for this time around, but come on. If you're really going to leave the SEC out when you're talking about a league that has won 13 of the last 17 national championships, and it hasn't just been Alabama and Georgia that have done it either, as we know. LSU, Auburn, Florida, Tennessee, if you want to go back to the late 90s. So I think the college football playoff, if those folks don't realize it, they will eventually. They need the SEC as much as the SEC needs the college football playoff.
Well, and let me give you a point of this too, Trav. And I've been told by a mutual friend of ours who has done a lot of television consulting, and he makes a good point. Is and again, TV doesn't tell them what to do with the committee, but the TV also is glad to whisper in their ear, shall we say, Trav, that let's not forget about that the winner of that SEC championship game.
Here's to put into perspective what Alabama will have accomplished if it wins Saturday. Georgia will have gone through a 31-game stretch where it is 29-2 with 2 national titles.
Right.
And the only 2 losses in that 31-game stretch would have been to Alabama.
That's right.
Alabama would have been the last team Georgia lost to before going on the 29-game streak, and the last team that it lost to at the end of it. So.
And look, I know you've written about this.
And just look at the resume. Forget about the eye test. You look at Alabama's wins if it wins this game on Saturday against top 10-ish type teams even, but ranked opponents, all those things. It's kind of amazing to me that, that's a possibility. And I get it. Look, Texas beat Alabama. Texas is in a good spot going into the Big 12 championship game. Florida State, just on the merit of a 13-0 season, I would say would be deserving. But if we're talking about a team that can compete in the college football playoff without Jordan Travis at the quarterback position, just remember Marcus Outson in '98 taking on Tennessee out in the Fiesta Bowl in the championship game that year. Didn't work out too well for the Red and the Seminoles.
And Trav, I also talked with some Florida State folks who I highly respect recently who were close to that program, and they told me that they said, look, we would have a lot of challenges playing Alabama or Georgia.
Yeah.
And they are very aware of that. And I know the criticism Alabama's got for the Texas game, but look, I would counter that by saying one of the reasons they have shown this kind of improvement was their weaknesses were exposed in that Texas game, and they have dealt with those.
Yeah.
So I truly believe, Trav, that yes, it was a loss, but could you also argue that it was a turning point of the season too?
Well, if it wasn't, the next week was. The performance at South Florida led to some definitive personnel moves that started at the quarterback position and continued from there. But yeah, I think in terms of validating a true champion, you leave out potentially an SEC team that has one loss and has resume wins as good as anybody else in the tournament.
Right.
And has beaten the two-time defending national champion in Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Good luck explaining that. Although I think the committee wins no matter what. The committee is hoping Georgia wins Saturday. And I understand it. I'm not saying that it's biased for Georgia, but just in terms of how its life will be for those folks moving forward.
Yes.
Georgia wins Saturday, it's a lot easier. But if Georgia loses Saturday, oof. I wouldn't want to be in that. Well, I would be in that spot because I'd have Alabama in. It wouldn't be that difficult for me. But, yeah, I don't know. Because if you put Alabama in, do you leave Georgia out? I think you might have to. You know,
the committee will have their hands full. But the good thing about it is, Trav, a year from now, with the expanded playoff,
I guess it's good.
Yeah.
I mean, what are these games going to mean in a year from now? I mean, I know you and I will watch them and care about them, but you know, these games like Alabama, Auburn, Ohio State, Michigan, and even the games leading up to rivalry weekend in late November, it's, you know, we saw Kirby basically sit a couple of guys against a rival.
Yes.
You know? How much of that are we going to have once you know you're in already, regardless, that weekend? So I worry about that part. But the thing is, it is the perfect transition year for this because it's one of the exceptions where there's too many teams and not enough spots. Legitimately.
Yes.
I know we like to argue, or people like to argue in other years about so-and-so. And a lot of times the argument has to go all the way to the group of five to talk about a team getting screwed. You know, we don't have to do that this year because we got plenty of power fives, a handful of power fives that could get left out of this thing. And that is perfect to go into a 12-team playoff.
It is.
There's no doubt about that.
Yeah. Yes. No question. So, and listen, we've covered so much stuff, and we don't have time to go into you just touched on this, was a lot of next year's schedule is coming out, and my Lord, it's just absolutely brutal, and we'll pick that up for our listeners over the next few weeks.
I can tell you Alabama's road games next year at Wisconsin, at Tennessee, at LSU, at Oklahoma.
Oh,
just a little bit of a tease of that.
Yes. Yeah. And
how are fans? We talked about the expense involved in trying to follow your team.
Yes.
I mean, think about it starting next year, what you're going to have to give up if you want to go on that sort of slate of road games. And that's before you get to potentially a conference championship ticket and then an expanded college football playoff ticket and the travel and everything else. Crazy, man.
It is.
But we're in a recession, Brent. I keep being told that we're in a recession, you know, or people just don't have it. I don't know where they're getting it from, but God bless them. Seems like more people are.
And listen, the money for the playoff, Trav, is going to be numbers that we've never seen before.
Oh yeah.
Is a reality of it. And listen, I do want
And
to
you know
say,
what? People are still going to watch bowl games too.
you got
They,
it.
they
That's
will.
right.
All the talk about, well, what is this? And I'm not saying it's going to hurt television ratings for rivalry week or any of that. People are still going to watch. That's not the point.
Mhm.
I mean,
Mhm.
that's another reason why we're doing this.
Oh yeah.
Because there's just more money out there to be
Yes.
made. There's without risk,
Yeah.
pretty much.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. There,
All right.
and my ending question is going to be, and I had lunch with some friends the other day, and their favorite team is even in another conference. But as I was leaving, they said, and we really do love those pops reports. That's a staple. So with that, Trav, was his behavior at Thanksgiving,
Yes.
was it pops like, or
Yeah.
or how did he do?
Well, he was exemplary. It's gotten to the point of almost boring. I mean, I hate to disappoint folks. I mean, there's always that little bit of unknown with
Yes,
Pops. You just don't
yes,
know. It could. And look, we fed him bourbon injected slushies. We fed him apple pie Jello shots.
right,
We fueled him up a little bit, but
yeah.
he kind of just sat there and was grandpa, great grandpa even. So he's doing well. Pops is doing well.
Good.
He's got to get the eyes fixed. I think he's actually going to do the LASIK. So we're going
Real
to get him, yeah, we're going to get him seeing a little bit better. But
good.
he still says some things that, you got to keep it moving. You just got to keep it moving with Pops, especially in family settings, social settings.
Yes.
Some things you just got to keep him moving. But he's good. We're good. And it's always good to be with you, Brent, right here on Second Helping on the Belly Up Podcast Network. Always appreciate you being here. Always appreciate our listeners, our network, Bill Oakley, executive producer of the program. Anything else before we get out of here, Brent?
Well, people may not realize this, but not only are we going to have controversy probably on Sunday, but on Monday, the transfer portal gates open wide.
Yeah.
So we've got about a 45-day window with that. That's going on. So, Trev, do we need to have anything else going on at this point?
This next month will provide the latest example of why, if you're a coach and you
Yes.
have the opportunity right now to work in the NFL
Yep.
or
Yep.
college football, you'll work in the NFL
Yeah.
because it's going to be absolute bedlam, chaos, sleep deprivation, all those things for those folks in college football. Just a crazy, crazy month upon us. And we'll talk about it right here on Second Helping. Thanks again, Brent.
My pleasure, bud. We'll look forward to next week. Take care.
For Brent Beaird, Travis Reier, thanking you for joining us once again right here on Second Helping, the podcast of choice of fans and followers of the best league in all of collegiate athletics, the Southeastern Conference. Until next time, so long, everybody.